email? What does it mean?
Communication is the imparting or exchanging of information or news.
The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place.
Conversation is the oral exchange of sentiments, observations, opinions, or ideas.
Forbes Books Radio presents The Conversation with Clinton M. Padgett.
Welcome back to part 2 of my conversation with Paula Davis, founder and CEO of the Stress and Resilience Institute and author of Beating Burnout at Work. We pick up the discussion with Paula explaining her term, sticky recognition.
So that's a term that I came up with, and it's basically just meant to be a way to show a person or your team the evidence of their impact. So I keep coming back to this notion of when I myself as a worker know that I'm making an impact, when we collectively together as a team know that we're making an impact. Again, the benefits that you see from that, just motivationally and psychologically are huge, right? There's, again, lower burnout, lower attrition, higher organizational commitment. All sorts of things happen when I can very keenly see that connection. And as I was researching the sticky recognition piece, I stumbled into, because I kept asking myself, why is this sticking? Like I would talk to people about their stories of, they didn't call it sticky recognition, but they would tell me a story about, a time when they got feedback and that they remembered it 20 years. They remembered it for 20 years, 14 years. I'm like, why? What is making it stick so much? And that led me into the second part of the equation, which was the science of mattering, where we are both achieving things that are important to us, and we are also being recognized for the things that we are doing. And so it's a fundamental human need that we all have. And that sticky recognition piece really turns on or blooms that deeper mattering need or source.
Yeah, I think most of us recognize we want to matter, whether it's in our workplace or whether it's at home. We want to feel like we matter, right? So
yeah, I just put this is one of my latest LinkedIn posts, but I had a conversation. I happened to be speaking at a law firm retreat, and you always have interesting conversations with lawyers. And so these, being a partner retreat, this was, senior level people in a law firm. And one of the partners pulled me aside after the program, and I had been talking about sticky recognition and mattering in part. And he said, I don't think we ever really lose the need to feel like we matter in our world of work. And we had a great conversation about it. And then later at dinner, I was talking to a different partner, and this partner's view is the one that I oftentimes will hear, especially from senior leaders. I don't need to be recognized. Like, I don't need that recognition stuff. So I said, I kind of pushed back a little bit, and I said, but you might not need it in terms of like words. You might not need someone to send you an email, but I bet you really appreciate it when a client tells you you've done a really great job and they're going to send you more work, right? I bet you appreciate the corner office that you're sitting in. I bet you appreciate the comp bump that you got and that lovely bonus that you got as well. So it's like, let's expand how we think about sticky recognition and mattering. No, you don't necessarily need someone to tell you something, but I bet you really want some of those other, kind of visible signs of recognition and mattering.
Yeah, I think if we said, I guess you don't matter, we'll take these away, I think he might change his mind.
Yeah, he paused. He paused for a really long time, and he said, like, you made me think there. Like, there you go. Or it's like, sticky recognition and mattering comes in all forms. And, it's not necessarily the same for everyone. We just want to feel noticed. We want to feel acknowledged. We want to be seen in what we do.
You kind of mentioned this, or you alluded to it at least, that when you give the recognition, have what you call thank you plus. And because you actually mentioned there's a couple of other sentences you could put in that really changes the impact.
It extraordinarily changes the impact. So I always tell people, I joke, I say, if you're not someone who says thank you a lot, start there, because the phrase a little thanks goes a long way really does apply if you don't ever hear it. So start there. But this is a strategy. This is a skill that can take like 2 minutes, a minute and a half. So it's free, not a big, output of time. But I give the example of talking about when I finished my first year of law school. I clerked for a judge, and I didn't feel like I knew what I was doing. I felt lost with a lot of the stuff that he was assigning to me. And he gave me this project that was really complicated. I did it and I turned it in. And I walked into my office a couple of weeks later and he had a note on my chair and he said, "Thank you so much for your report. The way that you summarized the cases helped me be able to see a really easy way that I could rule. Just wanted to say thanks." That's like literally all it says. And I still have the note in my office. And this was 20 plus years ago. So it's that extra piece. It's like naming the behavior that you saw that led to the good outcome. So that when he said, "The way that you organize those summaries helped me see the takeaways very clearly," that was it. That's the sticky part. That's the part that signaled to me like, wow, you really read this thing that I gave you. And you had to kind of like slow your roll in order to be able to meaningfully convey that back to me. And that's what makes it so extraordinary and so sticky, because we don't hear that hardly at all. So it's not a difficult skill in terms of actually doing it. It's difficult in that we have to, in the unmanageable workload and other chaotic environments that we find ourselves in at work, slow down enough to recognize moments where we could deliver that kind of feedback.
So we've talked about this a couple times now, but there's this roadblock of people saying they're too busy to say thank you or to recognize others, or as I've been known to say, I give you feedback every 2 weeks to say you're doing a good job. It's called a paycheck. Yep. So how do we help leaders see the value in taking that pause that refreshes and basically says thank you plus?
This has been one of the more interesting aspects of this segment in particular when I talk to leaders, because they'll oftentimes be very, very blunt with me. And, a lot of them, I think, recognize the importance of it or what have you, but, they love to push back. And, I think for a lot of folks, we're so worried about making the numbers or making sure something doesn't happen or preventing the error or the mistake that we don't take the time to then amplify what's going right. So there's that component of it. There's also, there's not a sense of urgency around this, or not a perceived sense of urgency, right? It's like, oh man, if I don't say thank you this week to someone, I bet they're going to leave. Like we don't think that. And then other leaders have gotten into more of the conversation around, well, this feels like, everybody gets a snowflake, or now we just all have to kind of like sit around and like kumbaya it out or whatever. But I appreciate the frankness. But what I always say back to them, no matter what, is that this isn't about stroking someone's ego. This is about really conveying to people what they're doing well in a succinct way that activates just like this whole cascade of positive psychological fuel that at the end of the day, if we're going to talk dollars and cents, is going to make you more money. So to say nothing of the fact that it's going to be beneficial in other ways from a motivational and a well-being standpoint. So
when we talked about autonomy, is that just where and when people work, or is it bigger than that?
It's bigger than that. And I think that's one of the things that I hope people take away from the book when they read that part in particular. Because as soon as I mention that to a lot of leaders, they're like, oh man, there's nothing we can do, right? Because, our work has a policy around, when people can come in, and like now we're 4 days back in the office or whatever it is. And they resort kind of to that narrow framing of control and flexibility. And what I discovered is that if we start to have a broader conversation, leaders then can start to see like, oh, there's other ways that I can help people have a perceived sense of control and flexibility. I can give them more decision-making latitude. When I hand them an assignment or a project or what have you, I can tell them to just run with it and, just CC me on the emails, but this is yours to kind of deal with. I can, if they've earned that sense of autonomy, I can give that to them. I can encourage them to flex their creative muscles, to design something a little bit of a different way, or to, think about a problem perhaps in a little bit of a different way. I can suggest to somebody that, hey, you should really meet, these 3 people in our organizational system, and give you the latitude to then be able to connect with people and form different groups the way that you want to. That's social autonomy. So there's a lot of different entry points that leaders can take when they expand their thinking around what autonomy can really be.
So we were talking about hybrid a minute ago, or fully remote. And I know that one of the lack of community is one of those 6 core drivers of stress and disengagement. So how do we build community if we're just virtual or on, Teams all the time?
Yeah, I think it goes back to taking those one-on-one moments that we were talking about, right? So the sense of like whether you call it having a meaningful conversation, whether you have it, your typical one-on-ones, whether you call it I originally was calling them Seinfeld meetings. So Seinfeld being a really popular show back in the day about nothing, they would joke that it's a show about nothing. Like, so have a meeting about nothing, right? Like, just don't have a work outcome attached to it. And then you can sort of see where the conversation starts to go. And it might feel a little goofy, the first couple or few times, but when people start to, get in the habit of that, then they become used to that. So I think, you can certainly do that in a virtual way. I think that you can make time. One of my favorite studies is about firefighters and talking about how when firefighters have their community meals and they eat together, their sense of engagement goes through the roof, their burnout levels go down, and other things happen. So that sense of, joining someone for a virtual coffee or a virtual lunch and still kind of taking that time to just leave work over here for a second and connect and have those meetings is important. And I do think it is, even if someone is, fully remote or hybrid, I think having or building in those moments where you can still get together quarterly for an in-person something at such and such office, or the retreats or things of that nature, I think also become important. It's building in some of that in-person piece too is important.
Yeah, it's funny. The negative side of my brain when you said the Seinfeld meetings is meetings about nothing. I know there's at least 10 people listening to this go, well, every meeting I go to is a Seinfeld meeting then.
Meeting about nothing. I do not even need to be at those meetings because there's so much about it. I never even thought about it that way. That's probably one of the factors why I don't use that term anymore. But yeah, not how I meant it.
No, I love it. I love it. It's just, I work with a lot of teams. And so I already know there's somebody rolling their eyes go, that's every meeting I go to. Why are we having this? So other research that you mentioned shows that having a best friend at work results in greater customer engagement, being more efficient, a safer workplace environment, and more innovation, but only about 30% of the people have a best friend at work. So again, I don't want to keep beating on this hybrid and remote, but it is a challenge we deal with. So how do you establish friendships in that environment? Does it go back to the one-on-ones again?
Well, I think some of it is the one-on-ones. The one-on-ones are oftentimes between, a leader and a direct report. And so I think sometimes we may feel uncomfortable thinking about establishing a friendship where you've got, the different levels of authority. And so I think it goes back to carving out and creating a sense of our people on my team connecting with each other on a regular basis. And what does that look like? Because if we are a distributed team, especially if we are working across time zones globally, perhaps, what do we have to do? And I think that just the regularity of trying to connect in some of these more informal ways becomes important. I think then it becomes even more important to have some of these quarterly in-person get-togethers, and we're going to rotate around where we're going to meet. We're early 2026. I spoke at a company retreat last fall, and it was the first time that they had seen each other in person in 2.5 or 3 years. So, we're comfortably, hopefully not going to beyond the pandemic or, certainly the effects of it. And I'm still seeing a lot of folks who have not interacted or met each other in person. And so it's a challenge for sure.
Yeah, I think that you hit on something there. I think the people that have worked together for 5 years before the pandemic were able to transition. The ones that I was always more worried about were the new grads who their first job was totally hybrid and they had never met these people. And, when you talk about culture is a big word. To me, culture is what I see when nobody's around and the person hangs the phone up and then says something derogatory about the client. That, to me, not a good culture, but that's culture. And it's hard to see that when you're virtual. So it's curious. I was always worried about people who came on during the hybrid or virtual and never had met people and didn't really have a mentor, didn't really know how the culture worked. I think it's another challenge.
And you're not exposed as much to the decision makers, the people who can put a name with a face and say, maybe they might remember you 3 months down the road, because that proximity bias is real, right? If I saw Paula walking down the hallway 3 months ago and we had an informal little chit chat and she said how much she'd love to be able to work on one of my projects one day, and I'm thinking about that 3 or 4 or 5 months from now, and I remember her and I remember that conversation because we bumped into each other and had a little informal chit chat. I mean, that's a real thing. And so that proximity, understanding that proximity bias exists, and making sure that you as a leader are being very conscious of making sure that people who are hybrid or more remote are being staffed on visible projects and are being, included on meetings and other things is critical.
What we found interesting in our 40 plus years of doing project work is we do a lot of really big global projects, and we have this rule that when we do a project, you must come together face to face for a week. And over that week, we'll plan the project. And the subtle thing that's really happening is, as I said earlier, I'm changing you from an email address to which I feel no connection into somebody who has kids like I had kids, and your kids play this and my kids play that. And so now I'm building accountability to the other people on my team. And we found that we could do 2-year projects remotely as long as we have that first meeting face to face. If we make the investment to spend a week together doing the plan, then people will hold themselves accountable to deliver on their task for the next 2-3 years.
And I think, so first of all, I love that. And I think sometimes companies, what they see is like, oh my gosh, we have to fly people in from like all over, and they see the expense piece, which I get, and that's real. But what you also have to look at is, what are you getting for the money that you're spending with people coming together, and that trust. So the accountability, the trust, the cohesion, the potential increase in psychological safety, because I now feel more safe to speak up and within the group because I now feel like I know you a little bit better, is immeasurable and is far beyond the dollars and cents amount that you spend up front. So I get that can feel really hard, in the moment, but I love that you all did that, and that's a great idea.
Yeah, we make it work because we tell them the ROI on the back end, as you just alluded to, is much greater than the cost of the flights.
Yep.
So we talked a little bit about ABC. Let's talk about ACR now. Active, constructive responding, which again, I love these terms. Mm-hmm. So what is it and how does it help boost belonging?
Well, of all the skills, so I actually learned, this is one of the skills that I was taught as part of my resilience sort of segment in programming back at the University of Pennsylvania. So I have been teaching this concept now for 17 years, and it is probably, of all the skills that I teach, probably my favorite skill of all, in part because I have seen such an astronomical benefit in my own relationships because of this. And it's of all the things that I teach, people come up to me afterwards saying, oh, I'm passive constructive or I'm passive destructive. And these people really start to like identify with these different categories, but they sabotage relationships all over the place. And I think one time, just when you hear what this is, and how it's a very counterintuitive way of building relationships. And it's through shared good news. It's through shared wins. It's through shared success. So it's sort of that positive side of the equation that we oftentimes don't pay attention to. And that just generally as human beings, we're not very good at. We are hardwired and programmed to notice and seek out and remember negative information is how humans are wired. It's kept us alive for all of these years. So when people, pepper in these little moments of like, oh, my golf handicap improved, or oh, it's my birthday next week, we're not like hearing them in the same way. They don't command our attention. But this is the research of Dr. Shelley Gable and her team. And what she's found is that when we capitalize, when we respond in the right way, when somebody has these moments of shared wins and success, it does astronomically positive things for our relationships and for team cohesion and what have you. And it doesn't mean it's just like the thank you plus. You don't have to have a long conversation, because I think sometimes, again, when I ask people, what are the roadblocks for you being able to do this well? I'm too busy and I don't have time and da-da-da-da. But her research really shows it's like 45 seconds to a minute. It comes down to basically asking one more question than you otherwise would. So if I'm excited and I'm like, hey, Clint, my birthday's, next week and I'm super excited. One of the quadrants is called passive constructive. So you might say, oh, that's great, Paula. Cool. Right. And we oftentimes think that that's enough. That little like, woo, I heard you, woo, the little rah-rah is enough to really cement the quality and build the quality of the relationship. And it's not, because when I'm excited that it's my birthday, when we're excited about anything, whether it's a big thing or a little thing, I want to tell you about it, right? I want to wallow in it a little bit. And if you're not asking me questions or like giving me the opportunity to do that, it's sort of frustrating and it kind of falls flat. So that's one style. Another style is where we call it conversation hijacker or response shifter. So if you're like, hey, it's my birthday. And I'm like, oh, cool. My birthday's next month. And I'm planning this big trip and I'm going to Hawaii and I'm doing all this fantastic. I've like taken the conversation and hijacked it and made it about myself. And you're just kind of left there going, oh, well, thanks. It was my birthday, but all right. The next style
there's a commercial, not to interrupt your flow. There's a commercial that I saw recently where a lady's talking about her birthday and it's at a work event and there's a big cake and people keep going by taking the cake and then somebody picks the last piece as they walk away and she goes, well, it's my birthday. And she's looking around and nobody's thanking her. They're just taking the cake.
Just taking the cake. Oh, that's horrible, right? And you feel your joy just whittling away bit by bit. The third category that Dr. Gable and her team identified is what we call the joy thief, active destructive responding. So you might be all excited and you'd be like, hey, it's your birthday. It's my birthday coming up. And if I hear that, I might say, oh, well, that's amazing. But, oh man, you're getting up there in years, right? How you feeling, now that you're insert age here, kind of thing. And so it's sort of like you squash somebody's joy, oftentimes in an unintentional way. But the last style that she talks about is active constructive responding. That's ACR. And that is the only style that really builds the health and quality of your relationships, both at work and outside of work. And so that's where, you acknowledge the birthday. Oh, that's amazing. How are you going to celebrate? You look fantastic for your age, however is authentic for you to kind of carry out that conversation. And again, it can be a couple or a few minutes, but when we are responded to in an active and constructive way, it increases psychological safety. It increases our self-efficacy. We feel like we can navigate challenges better. It increases our resilience. Again, a lot of wonderful things come from it. And so it's always interesting when I see people practice this, because if you don't do it a lot, we oftentimes end up in that passive constructive faux listener first box where it's like, yay, good job. Awesome. Like we have those kind of like, we're just not trained. We haven't trained our brain to actually go beyond those like initial platitudes. But I love having people practice this in workshops because the energy in the room just goes through the roof and you take your phone out and you show them the pictures of the grandkids or whatever it is that you're getting into. And we just don't pay attention to that enough, both at work and outside of work.
And I would throw a caveat on that. It's even better if when you ask these questions, you're looking them in the eye, not looking down at your phone or looking at your computer, looking away or whatever.
Yeah. And I think that then even if you're trying to be active and constructive in your responding, I think that you can lop into that, passive constructive faux listener, even if you're asking questions, if it seems like I don't care and they're just, performative and I've got to finish this email anyway, that probably doesn't meet the level of ACR.
So I don't want to leave this conversation without finishing talking at least about resilience. And you define resilience as a capacity for stress-related growth. And I think that's a really great definition. What does it look like for a team to bounce forward after a setback?
Yeah. So I include a nice little chart in the book because I think it's a good thing when we're thinking of, so there's different levels of resilience. There's different intersections with resilience. There's individual resilience, which I think we oftentimes hear the most about. There's team resilience, and then there's organizational resilience. And the way that they're built is different in each way. And when it comes to team resilience, I think there's also so much that teams can do on the front end. So maybe we just went through a significant challenge. How are we going to prevent this going forward? How are we potentially going to slow down something similar to this from happening again? And it gets back to a lot of like really effective teaming practices, right? Do we have a strong sense of psychological safety? Do we know each other's capacity? Are we talking about the wins and successes frequently enough? Because that's fortifying for our team and that's bringing us together. Do we have that sense of trust established? Do we have the right internal and external partnerships cultivated that are going to help us continue to withstand, the complexities and the challenges and the adversities and what have you? So there's lots of different things that teams can do before the challenge, during the challenge, and after the challenge, keeping those open lines of communication, making sure you follow up with people, as whatever the challenges is happening, during it. to make sure that their capacity is still okay. What are the backup systems? There's all sorts of different entry points and ways for teams to start to kind of build and flex those resilience muscles. I'm looking at my desk because there's a paper here somewhere. It's a brand new paper in the annual review of psychological and organizational behavior around team empowerment and team resilience. So I'm gonna read up on the latest and greatest there, but it's a really powerful, I think it's one of the more necessary skill sets for people and teams and organizations to develop, given the way the world of work is expanding.
So one of the things I love when I read books like yours is there'll always be this hidden nugget that I did not see on my bingo card when I picked the book up. And for this one, it was, you tell a story about the predictive ability of heart rates on decision making.
Yes, that was one of the things that stuck with me as well when I was researching it, that I stumbled on that little bit. And I can just picture it's a really cool concept. And I wonder how do we actually do this practically in the workplace? Because I don't think we're all going to attach to heart rate monitors. But the study found that teams whose heart rate synchrony, I always say that word incorrectly, but when our heart rates start to get on a rhythm that kind of matches each other's, they found that teams where that happened had higher levels of trust, better decision-making, and other really strong positive team outcomes, which I thought was really, really cool. So biologically wired, we're cohesive down to the heart rate level in terms of how our team functions.
Was there any correlation or causation? I mean, why would somebody, is it because some people are angry and so their heart rate is high and other people's are more calm, and so if everybody's at the same level, it's better? Or was there anything about that?
No, I think it was just a signal, kind of indicating level of comfort, right? I think it was, to me, when I read it, it was really just sort of a signifier of psychological safety. We can say the hard things to each other. We can say the good stuff to each other. We are able to, share partially formed ideas with each other, where we can just kind of hash out and noodle through and no one's going to get mad or say we're stupid or whatever. I think it's just an indicator that we're just so extraordinarily comfortable with each other that when we're kind of all just kind of traveling in that same sort of trustful way, the outcomes are great. I would love to see how this functionally would happen. I can just picture a group of physicians or lawyers sitting in a room and all have heart rate monitors on them, trying to make them all match.
Competition.
Yeah. Right. Totally.
So there's so much more we could cover, but I'm running out of time. So let me just tell people they should get the book. You should read it, because we didn't talk about the 4-4-4 way to end a week. We didn't talk about the 3-3-3 time method or the 20% rule. So much. I'm an engineer, so I love numbers. So much more to cover there. So let me end with the 3 questions that I ask everybody who come on. First one, are there any leadership principles that speak to you personally and guide your day-to-day behaviors?
For me, writing this book has changed my approach to talking to my own team in terms of heightening that sticky recognition and mattering. So to me, that becomes the core or the source for everything else going forward.
What is the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
My dad, because I was going through a time, it's about 4 or 5 years ago, where I was trying to figure out whether I should scale my business, continue to grow it, I brought on a director of, revenue growth, I can't even remember what the title was. And we were having a really tough go of it. And so I called my dad and I'm what do I do? And he just said, keep your business you for as long as possible. So I've kept that in the back of my mind.
Yeah, it's hard to argue when you're a team of one.
Yeah. Right.
What is the best book or article you've read recently, and what was the key takeaway?
So I know this is a future guest of yours, and one of my favorite books was The Power of Mattering by Zach Mercurio. And I think his framework about just making sure that you pay attention to the fact that people need to be seen, they need to be noticed, and they need to be affirmed on a regular basis really brought me back to, I think, certainly my daughter is almost 10. But really slowing myself down on a day-to-day basis to make sure that I'm just noticing what she's doing, that I'm affirming her behaviors, all of the positive, good stuff that she's doing in particular, instead of the no's and the negative. I think was really eye-opening. And then I have always loved Dr. Kelly McGonigal's book, The Upside of Stress. Because for as much as I talk about burnout and all of the downside consequences of burnout, there can be an important upside to stress. And the way that she talks about the research is just really, really lovely. So if anyone's interested in that, she also has a really great TED Talk. So Dr. Kelly McGonigal, The Upside of Stress.
I'll have to look into that one too. So this has really been great. I appreciate your time today. If people want to learn more about you or engage your services, how can they do that?
Sure. My website is the hub of all of that. And so it's www.stressandresilience.com. So find lots of downloadable resources and other materials and information about, workshops and consulting and all of that. And then LinkedIn is also my social media platform of choice. So just Paula Davis, hop over to Paula Davis and find me on LinkedIn as well.
That's awesome. Thanks, Paula. Really appreciate your time today. Thanks for the conversation.
Yeah, thanks, Clint.
Thanks for listening to The Conversation. To find out more about Clint, go to clintonmpaget.com and pick up Clint's book, How Teams Triumph, Managing by Commitment, at Amazon. The Conversation with Clinton M. Paget is a production of Forbes Books.